Thanks, Marty, and welcome, fellow panelists. I'm Ben Brandis. I help lead Cross Country Consulting's private equity practice. Cross Country is a leading financial consulting firm that works with family offices and private equity firms and other investors on what we call the office of the CFO for their portfolio companies. So that could mean anything from reporting practices, optimizing the close process, FP&A analysis, integration of add-ons from a financial perspective, etc. So you'll learn a lot more about me as we go along, and I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves in a question and answer format. So in the essence of time, let's get to it. First question is for Gary. You've worked at two multi-billion-dollar family offices based out of Boston, each with vastly different investment strategies. In your opinion, what are the major impediments to family offices doing direct investing?
Thanks, Ben. Right now, I'm a managing director at Oppenheimer in their private wealth business, and I have a lot of family office clients, and all of the family office clients want to do private equity. And there's a group of family offices that do direct deals, and there's a group of family offices that don't. And the ones that are doing direct deals, they're looking for deal flow. And so I help them find that flow, and some of that is through our middle market investment bank. The ones that are looking for funds, there's thousands of hundreds and thousands of funds out there. We don't look for the big, multi-billion-dollar funds. We look for kind of smaller, niche funds where you can get alpha. But the biggest impediment and what puts one family office in that direct deal group versus a fund group, I think, is expertise or lack of expertise, right? And it's subject matter expertise, and it's also structuring expertise. And I'll tell you, so from the family offices that I came from, I built and ran two family offices in Boston and acted as the CEO of both. And the first one was a multifamily office, and I had a staff of 11 people just to do the liquid investments. They wanted to do direct deals, so we had a separate unit that had 7 full-time employees, and they were people that had operating experience. They could look at the financials. They had structuring experience, and that's a big group. And they invested directly in deals where they had domain expertise, and it was consumer products. The second family office that I built and ran as CEO was a single family office, and it had a staff of 3, and I was one of the 3. And so we weren't staffed up, and we didn't have the internal expertise. We didn't have the subject matter expertise, or we didn't have investment banking and structuring people on board. So we didn't do a lot of direct investing. And a lot of direct investing and direct deal is a lot more talking than check writing. I think the family offices that do write checks have to be structured the way my first family office was, where you have a separate group of people and if they're not employees, you have to have a team of accountants and a team of experts that you're going to pay. And I had one family office was selling a business, and I knew another family office that was interested in buying it. And we flew out to Utah, and they hired a team of experts and a team of accountants, and they spent months doing due diligence and probably spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to not do the deal. And they said no. And so if you're not willing to either spend money on the staff to do it internally or spend money on external experts, you really shouldn't be doing direct deals, in my opinion.
Thanks, Gary. You mentioned a big issue, to boil it down, is infrastructure of the family office. So I'd like to turn over now to Praveen, actually, who runs a growth equity private equity firm, also based in Boston, with permanent outside capital. And Praveen, maybe you could talk to us about the key infrastructure items that you've incorporated in your fund that's made the most difference?
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everybody. We founded our firm that I co-manage now about 7 years ago. And this was after 20 years of experience of managing and working at venture capital, tech-oriented venture capital firms prior to that. And the current firm, which is called Wave Equity Partners, invests in manufacturing innovation companies in clean energy, food, water, waste, clean air, etc. And what we quickly realized was there is a big difference between sectors which are well established. So for example, in life sciences and in tech sector, the whole innovation ecosystem in the US has built up over 3 to 4 decades now. In clean energy, the ecosystem is still very young and unevolved. And therefore, the entrepreneurs that you find who are making these radical innovations and bringing new products to the market are very smart engineers and scientists, but they don't have experience of building companies and exiting companies. So we realized we need to build a lot of infrastructure in the firm to not only select the right deals, but once you have selected the deal and you have bought 30% equity in the business, what do you do in order to make sure that the company executes well? There is strong excellence in every aspect of their operation, everything from supply chain management to manufacturing, sales and marketing, and HR and IP management, etc. But they also are able to scale very rapidly because when we invest in them, their revenue is less than $5 million, and we want to grow it to $100 million. And that scale of revenue buildup is very different in hardware companies, the companies that we invest in, compared to, say, software companies. Software, scale used to be, making more copies of the CD. Now it is, all managed in the cloud, and it's very scalable. But here you actually have to manufacture 100 times more gadgets, whatever you're building. So we built extensive infrastructure in the fund to support our portfolio companies. So we have operating partners who are domain experts that are injected into the company, and they help the company scale up and acquire best practices in all of the different operational aspects that I talk about. Even on the deal selection side, we have to make sure that we are finding the best deals when we are exiting the company. Now, nearly half of our portfolio companies, we have 11 portfolio investments now, because our allocation per company is about $20 million. And nearly half of the companies are in exit conversations now. We have to do a lot of hand-holding even in that process, making sure we are bringing the right financial advisors, the right auditors, the appropriate exit pathways, designing the whole strategy, etc. So it takes tremendous amount of effort and time to do a deal well. And I would say from our own firm, we spend at least 10 man hours a week with every portfolio company to make sure that they're executing well.
Thank you. A lot of work, a lot of infrastructure. So maybe I'll turn this now over to Mauro, who has experience in investing in private equity, as well as multifamily offices. And Mauro, from your perspective, hearing from Gary and Praveen, what is your decision-making process when you make an investment?
Thanks, Ben. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So yes, I have. I think I'm lucky because I have the opportunity to see the investment process from many different angles. I am an equity partner in a quite big family office here in Switzerland. I'm based in Switzerland actually, and I am also an equity partner of an asset management company, and I work with the European Commission as part of the jury members for helping the European Commission to allocate funds for innovation. Actually, I work in the new program Horizon Europe with 85 billions of euro of funds available for innovative companies. So I would say that I see the investment process from different angles in different life stage. For example, in venture capital, in scale up, in mature companies, in restructuring. I would say that with the European Commission, I look at companies in venture capital or scale up stage, and with the family office and Etica Capital, that is the other institutional investor, I look at companies in restructuring phase or in the maturity phase. So clearly the key parameters that we are looking at are different depending on the strategy that and the life cycle of that company. But in general, I think there are some common things that you need to look at when you check an investment, you check a company. So the first thing is that you need to believe that the sector is strong and it has a positive trend for the future. Second, you need to believe that the company has a competitive advantage or as an innovation. You want to spot uncovered value from that company, from that opportunity. For example, with the, let's say, private equity from the family office side, we like companies that are undervalued or undermanaged. We focus on stable and recurring cash flow to extract the value. We prefer to use a low amount of capital, and I would say that right now we are in a really good position for using leverage for the low level of interest rates. So we think that in the next 12-18 months we will have a big wave of restructuring company above all in Europe, and there will be a lot of possibility to use leverage for acquiring these companies. Another thing, we look at the management team in two ways. If we are speaking about a venture capital or a scale up, we want a really strong management team. If we are looking at restructuring or mature company, we want to see an undermanaged company so that we can add skills and capability to uncover the value. At the moment, we have deals that I would say are all below, at least the deals on my desk are all below 100 million, and they go from Italian real estate because right now Italian real estate, there are a lot of grants given by the government for innovating and renovating the Italian real estate. So we have a fund there that is working on this and is very successful. We have a project on carbon credits. We have fintech. We have a fund in Luxembourg with Etica Capital that is named Etica Chain and is investing in a blockchain company and digital issuing of companies on the blockchain. That means they are going to issue financial securities on the blockchain. So traditional securities, but issued in a digital way in order to have access to the cryptocurrency market that at the moment has a value around 2 trillion, so 1 trillion for Bitcoin and another trillion for the rest of cryptocurrencies. We have two restructuring projects. One is on real estate in Florence, and the other one is on chrome plating tubes. And the last one is a business about a retirement home in Italy, because as you probably know, Italy has one of the oldest population around the world. So we think that the trend for this type of business will be very, very strong in the next few years.
Great. You're too busy.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it's a good thing. It's not a Alberti.
That's great. Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you. I've seen your name on the list here. And you have an interesting perspective now running a lower middle market private equity fund, but prior to that, running an extraordinarily large hedge fund that I'll let you name if you'd like to. And my question for you is, why has this pandemic environment been so good to PE, but not so good for hedge funds?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you. First of all, I apologize that I'm not visible, but I had a little technical problem here, so I had to use a different computer. So I apologize for that. Actually, the hedge fund industry had a mixed year. There were some firms that did extraordinarily well. The overall profits in the industry were probably down about 25%. Still a good year, though. The average return was about 11 versus the S&P at a little over 16. So it wasn't a bad year for the hedge fund industry, but it was mixed. There were some firms that had very challenging years. And part of the reason for that is you can get caught, since you have the ability to make decisions and affect them immediately, you can sometimes make bad decisions. So go short when you should be long, and be long when you should be short. And it's just, so there were some very substantial hedge funds that had very bad years, but there were also funds like Tiger Global, Viking, Citadel, Millennium that had huge years, up, substantially. And so it was a mixed year. The one advantage I think private equity has is you don't have the ability to take rash actions, which is important. And two, you have access to better information about your investments. So as a hedge fund investor, you're limited to public information, which comes out at discrete points in time. And that's really, management won't help you very much. So your ability to make a good decision at a point in time is limited. Whereas in private equity, you have access to all of the resources inside and outside the firm that you typically use to make the best possible decisions. And you also, in a difficult market like we were experiencing, in the second quarter, third quarter of last year, you can operate the fundamentals of the business. You can take actions. You also are in an active capacity. All of those things you obviously don't have as a hedge fund. We did both private and public equity. I worked for Paulson, which is a large multi-strategy firm in New York, and we did both public and private transactions. I did most of the private transactions because I was the only person with private equity experience, but I also did public investing in the telecom media space. And I agree with Gary. We did not have the infrastructure. We actually did well, maybe more because of luck than anything else. We bought some of the companies you'd know that we invested in were Steinway, which we acquired. We invested as a late stage venture investor in Alibaba and Lyft. We bought PF Chang's, which was less timely because it was shortly before the downturn, and some other businesses that you'd be less familiar with. So in general, it worked, but we didn't really have discrete assets, people allocated to doing private transactions. We did them with our regular hedge fund team. And that, I think, makes it more difficult. And your ability to succeed is definitely questionable, I think, in that environment.
Gotcha. Thanks, Kevin. And more to come with questions on your hedge fund experiences compared to others. But I don't want to leave out Carol. So as a chief investment officer for a number of family offices, you're seeing a bunch of these issues, obviously, that we've been talking about. And maybe I'll ask you to provide some color on some family office investing pitfalls that you've seen in the market, either recently or in general.
Thanks, Ben. Well, I've had my firm, Pepper International, for 20 years this year. This is my 20th anniversary. I started in the year of 9/11, and my 20th year is the year of the pandemic. So I figure if I can make it through this first 20 years, we'll see what the next 20 years will bring. And I act as the external CIO to several very large single family offices. And I think we heard a lot of good themes through these first comments and what are affecting the family offices. Competence, whether you can or cannot realistically do a direct private deal If you don't have the internal staff, how do you identify the right consultants to come in and match them with the deal that you're planning to do? And then how do you track it after the deal has been consummated? Because you're only at the beginning when you decide to make the investment. Now you've got to sit on a board and you've got to get involved if you don't want to lose your shirt typically, or you want to make sure that you know what's going on. So I would say the first place you have to start when you're in a family office is with the asset allocation, good old boring asset allocation, because you really have to figure out for each entity that you have realistically how much capital should be in private equity. And then if you plan on doing some directs, what percentage of that should be in the directs? How large are the directs that you want to do? Do you want to sprinkle a bunch of seeds with 20 grand each and see what sprouts? A lot of the young people like doing that in the next gens. It's a good way to get them involved with small investments to get started. And a lot of them are things they can relate to because they're tech oriented or apps and things like that. If you're going to go into private equity funds, large, medium, and small, which sectors of private equity, just doing a real asset allocation on the pieces of the various entities that you plan to put into private equity is a good place to start, because then you get much more realistic about what kind of resources you need. And also focusing based on the family's expertise and interests and what areas of private equity are you interested in, i.e. what sectors of the economy. So if you know absolutely nothing about tech, but you think that's where the growth is and that's where you want to be, perhaps you're better off starting in some funds, getting some experience, making a large enough contribution to get, really get involved and then see where it goes from there. If you've always had tremendous expertise in real estate or healthcare, then going into private equity deals in fields where you're more comfortable, you can, naturally take bigger positions perhaps and have a lot more comfort in what you're doing, and you can vet the deals better. I also find that people are most comfortable, and certainly during this pandemic when people aren't meeting up in person very much, working with other family offices that they know already. So I would say 99% of my deal flow that I actually look at, I get thousands of inputs because I have a public website and people can send it to my investments at Pepper International. But the ones that I really get serious about are typically coming from another family office or someone like Mauro, who I know that they're good investors. I know what, they know what I'm looking for. I know what they're looking for. And so we have a very open and robust dialogue. So I think having friends in the family office industry, and then having other family offices you can call and bounce ideas off of, or know people that are expert in whatever area it is that you're looking at to take a look. You can get all that done for free. Most of the family offices, we help each other for free. We're not charging consulting fees to do that, just to bounce ideas or see who's in that deal and why. So there's a nice network of people on the family office side. And I think family offices should take advantage of that network and really call your buddies in the industry, because they will be helpful to you. So I think getting good deal flow typically comes from other families. Vetting, as Gary said, you've got to have the resources, or you've got to go out and hire a good firm to help you when you're really getting into the nitty gritty. Another family office isn't going to do your due diligence for you. They're just going to be able to bounce ideas with you, but you have to get a team somehow if you're going to do directs. And then you have to track them. You have to absolutely have the infrastructure to stay on top of that deal. And I do think most of the next gens are most interested in social impact related private equity opportunities. That's where most of my next gens get very excited, and they want to get involved, and they want to sit on the board, and they want to get, start at a seed stage and see how that company will grow. That's a very good way to get very bored, turned off next gens involved and excited about working in the family office. Usually is through deals in areas that they're very passionate about.
Great, thank you. And I also appreciate your offering resources, for free, and mentioning the availability of those. Cross country is not free. Mm-hmm. This is an FYI, but we're well worth it. So now that we've got a little sense of family offices versus hedge fund in the current environment, I'm going to fire off some questions and we'll see where we go from there. But Gary, I'm going to start with you again. If you had to choose one person to hire at a family office, whether it's business development, deal sourcing, operational, whoever you choose, what would their role be?
that is a very difficult question. I mean, it would depend on how much, what your staff look like, and what the family office's agenda was. So so that happened to me, right? So when the first family office that I started, I was the first and only employee, and I was the CEO. And so the first person that I hired was a CIO who had come out of the endowment world at MIT. And, you know, so I knew, because I was tasked with kind of the liquid investments, because they had a group already in place doing the directs and the private stuff. So a CIO with kind of endowment investment experience across all asset classes, like Carol said, you need to have an asset allocation. You need to have, this is a family that didn't have an investment policy statement. They didn't have any roadmap. So we were literally starting from scratch. And so that was my first hire.
Gotcha. Okay, CIO. And, you know, Praveen, I'm going to turn to you next. You know, Gary mentioned the CIO function and just chief investment officer. And I would imagine that everybody in a private equity fund thinks they're the chief investment officer. With you have 11 portfolio companies, and just to give a sense of how difficult that is for a relatively small group, maybe you can talk about like how many portfolio companies are run or overseen by each partner, and the allocation between new investment opportunities and monitoring your old investments or your current investments.
If you can really compare the size of the portfolio that we have compared to the traditional venture model, we are actually a very small portfolio. 11 is not in even half the portfolio for a typical venture firm. Our equity holding is also larger than typical. Typical VCs would own 5%, 3%, 10% of companies. We are usually the largest shareholder in our portfolio companies. So 11 is not a terrible workload from a span of management perspective. Usually the rule of thumb in the venture capital industry is 5 to 6 board positions is okay for one person, for one partner. And we average less than that. Nevertheless, given the fact that we want to help our portfolio companies in such a proactive fashion, even 5 seems like a lot. And that's why we have started building out the bench of operating partners with deep domain expertise, and they go in and help the companies with manufacturing and supply chain and quality management, and in shaping their sales strategy or their brand perspective, even their executive hiring. In some cases, we have individual operating partners who do this. In other cases, we work with entire firms that do that. And we have developed these special relationships with different firms that go in and help our portfolio companies. If you ask me what position, if I were looking for the next operating partner, or which operating partner is most valuable for us, I would say it is somebody who has such a deep domain experience and coaching ability that when I introduce that person to a CEO of a company, the CEO instantly feels gratified, and he has a deep sense of respect and trust with this person. And the CEO wants to call this person every day to discuss the problems they are facing in their execution and seek his or her advice. And we are lucky to have a few such people, but we are always seeking out more, because there is so much to learn for these young entrepreneurs. I'm saying young, they're typically about 40 years old, but they have never managed a business before, never built a business. And so it's a very, very interesting experience and very intense interaction.
That's an interesting topic, and we could spend a lot of time on that. I do want to turn to Carol on that point. With the operational experience that is probably lacking from entrepreneurs, maybe with the folks that you're talking about investments, what do you do about that? Do you get them a coach? Do you have an operating partner at the family office or private equity firm to oversee, or how do you quote unquote solve that item?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it depends. That sort of sounds like a cop-out answer, but it really does depend on the industry and the person. If, for example, just simple things like hiring. I'm working with a young company now that one of my families invested in. And the CEO is a great, very enthusiastic young, I think he's 35, let's say, young guy, married, has a little baby, brings the baby to the meetings. It's very cool. But he made a very wrong hire in his head of sales. So he went with a buddy and it was all very LA, oh yeah, this guy's fabulous. Oh yeah. They didn't really check background. They didn't really get, heavy duty references on this head of business development. And after a month and a half, 2 months, they got their funding and they're getting going and sales were just not happening. And I said, dude, what's going on with your business development guy? He said, well, he hasn't really done anything. And now he's blaming us and saying we have to have more followers before he can bring in more brands. And I said, no, you got the wrong guy. And sure enough, when we just tried to get him to even put down his, use Salesforce, put all your leads in there and report to us every week on what's going on with your leads, the guy quit. He just quit. He couldn't handle it. So now we're going out to find a grown-up head of sales, because without, it's one thing to talk about things at a cocktail party, and especially in Los Angeles, I will fault the West Coast for this a bit. It's another thing to actually produce. So teaching these entrepreneurs how to have metrics and measure performance of the companies, which gets back to, Ben, your side of the road with the CFO stuff. I think having measurements and metrics, especially with these little companies that you're nurturing, that you're starting out with your little seeds that you want your kids to follow, they've got to get metrics in there immediately, because if they don't have goals to follow to and metrics to work against, they can flounder and waste months or a year, and then it's too late. They run out of money. Even if they had a great idea, they suddenly can't get more funding because they just took too long to get themselves organized.
Right. And especially in these days where you can't make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
People are taking less risk. You can't rely on multiple expansion. You've got to take care of some of those back office functions that maybe you didn't pay much attention to prior.
I mean, one of the things that I insist upon, which I would recommend all family office investors insist upon if you're going to go into these small startups, is you got to get them to write you a written monthly report with 4 or 5 KPIs that you're following. 4 or 5, like basic, depending on what the business is, what are the 4 or 5 things that they need to show every month that they've done every month, even every week if they're really losing it, but at least once a month, and then once a quarter, a real quarterly meeting and a real annual meeting, even from their very beginning, just to build those habits. And also for the 4 or 5 investors who are in there to actually have something to realize every month what the heck these people are doing, because things can fall through the cracks very easily. And I see Privy nodding over there. I bet you have something to say about that.
I was going to say, make sure at least one of those 5 metrics is cash on hand and the month of burn available.
Yes, that monthly burn 100%. Yep. And sales, if you're selling something, what is it and how much are you selling every month?
Exactly.
Whether it's a consulting or followers, whatever it might be, you have to have metrics. If without metrics, we're all lost.
Well, if I can add something, this is particularly interesting also because the model of the European Commission investment is exactly this. If the European Investment Fund is going to put money in a company, then they will require you KPI, they will require you reporting, and it's part of the program that they will give you mentorship and coaching. So I think this is something really important also because many times, and above all for young companies, they have been funded by someone that maybe is thinking more at the innovation itself than at all the different management procedures and other things that are around a company, and that at the end are very, very important to be successful with the contracts, intellectual property rights, reporting, KPI, risk management, and so on. So I would say that probably I think one of the biggest investor in the world, that is the agency that is actually is the European Commission has exactly adopted what Carol was saying.
Thank you.
Kevin, I have a question for you. From our discussion, I know that you're starting your own private equity fund in the lower middle market. Now hearing from the group here, which I think that you're aware of all the different roles that are necessary. What role are you going to play as a founder of the company?
That's a good question. Well, my experience is fairly lengthy and broad, and where I believe I add the most value is actually working with managements to try to achieve the objectives. So I actually agree with everyone. I think there are two key things to being successful. One is good information, which isn't always available in smaller companies. And the second is people who have the judgment and experience and expertise to use that information to make good decisions. Decision making is a critical part of successful investing, and it's not done very well in small companies. So we're gonna, one of the things we're doing is trying to bring data science to the lower middle market. And one of our colleagues is a data scientist with 40 years of experience in that industry, working for companies of all sizes. But the ability to extract good information both internally and externally, and then make sure you have the right management with the right skill set to use it effectively and make good decisions is critical to what we think our future success will hopefully be.
Gotcha. Gary, do you agree with that role as a primary role, overseeing management, the entrepreneur function? Is that the first thing that somebody should focus on in an investment? Because we know that management is one of the most important criteria for success.
Yes, I mean, assuming they pass all the screens, right, and the financials are in good shape, and the core of the company is a company that you want to invest in. Yes, I think management is key, because obviously, and I'm not a private equity person by training, but seeing these companies, there's a big difference between an entrepreneur who builds a company, the right guy to take it to the next level. And oftentimes true private equity guys, and Praveen, who have done this 50 times before, they need to watch management and step in, and sometimes it's replace management if they want that company to succeed.
Yeah. Hey, I know we're going a lot of tangential directions, but who cares? Praveen, how do you assess management teams?
I was going to comment on that. You know, you've heard the cliche, you know, we like to invest on the jockeys, not the horse. What we have experienced, so again, when you think about IT company versus a life science company versus an industrial technology company, the relative weightings of different factors change. So in IT company, it doesn't take much money to build a product. It doesn't take much money to commercialize a product. It is not very hard to find some, you know, alpha customers who are going to test your customer. And your product can evolve as you discover what the market really needs from you. And it can keep evolving while it is being used by customers for a period of a couple of years before you really settle on your release one. You cannot do that in the life sciences. You got some molecules, and if those molecules are not showing much of a promise, you can't. There is no time to turn it around and do something else. You can't do that with, you know, battery hardware stuff that we invest in. If you have a chemical formulation that is going to make a next generation solid state battery much more, you know, safe and productive and more affordable, and if it doesn't work, game is over. There is no tweaking. There is no alpha version and beta version and gamma version. So management is always important. But the relative weightings have changed. 10 years ago, when I was investing in software, when you found a CEO, a founder who has been a CEO before, and I built a company and sold it, you could just give him the money and be sure and be confident that he's going to do something good with it.
Mhm.
You can't make that judgment. You can't make the same kind of judgment in a hardware company. You really have to figure out the science. And if the science is right, then you can fix the management issues. You can work with the management. You can train them, coach them. You can empower them. You can surround them with the right people, even replace them if necessary. But the science has got to be right. Otherwise, the game is over.
That's interesting. Carol, this goes back to a point that you made. Free resources to help out on a lot of these different items.
Mm-hmm.
What resource or resources would you actually pay for?
Well, I think you have to pay for what you don't know and what you don't have. So for example, if a lot of families now that are looking at social impact companies, just take that as an example, and you want to go invest in a new form of solar, and you don't know anything about solar, you've never invested in solar, you don't use solar in your factories of your operating business, well, then you better go find yourself a good solar consultant and pay him or her to come in there and evaluate that technology and tell you whether it's good or if it's just another Me Too and it's really not moving the ball forward and it's a waste of money, for example. So I think definitely industry expertise is critical. If you don't have some very, clever analysts in your shop, you're going to probably get an outsourced investment banking type group to help you. Sometimes the lenders will help you if you're deciding to put together the deal. It depends also if you're going into somebody's club deal or if you're buying a company completely for yourself. So if you're buying something just for yourself, your friendly Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs people might help you out if you're a really big client. If you're a family office, we get a lot of freebies other people don't get. They'll do the models for you and they'll do everything for you if you give them enough assets in their bank. So sometimes they'll help you with that. I always pay for security and background checks for sure. We work with Kroll, and before we put money into a private deal of any size or consequence, everybody has to be backgrounded. And unfortunately, you do come up with some pretty ugly things. You'll find out the guy's been having multiple DWIs. Do you really want that person to be in charge of your money? No, you do not. So that usually kicks them out. Or you find out they've been a wife beater, or they don't pay their child support or something. You don't want that person running the company. So Kroll background checks are really important for large deals. And I'm sure, Kevin and Praveen and Gary all did that and Mauro, when they're getting really to the point where they're going to actually put money in. So we'll definitely pay for that. And, it's not that family offices won't pay, by the way. It's just that certain, I would say, really valuable senior advice can come from another family office, not necessarily the actual putting together the model or checking the references or whatever, but you can have other families that will give you their 2 cents, honestly. And if you've been co-investing with them, then they're the best people to ask, because you know how they think, they know how you think. And I think that's something that's very useful and an additional secret weapon. A lot of small companies like to go with family offices because they see them as kinder, gentler investors. And sometimes we're a little more patient typically. We're not trying to pass the company on to the next fund. We might want to hold it forever. So, that makes family offices a very attractive investor class to a lot of companies.
I think we only have a few more minutes, but I do want to ask one last question, and I'll leave this for Kevin and Mauro. Is based on what Carol and the group has said, resources, infrastructure, the type of things that need in this environment to do successful investing, what are your thoughts on club deals? Is it worth it to co-invest, even though you have to share management, it might be more difficult, because you can use the resources of your co-investment partner?
Yeah, I can speak in my situation. It's something that sometimes we do. Why? Because co-investment there are at least two reasons. The first is that you can reduce the risk. So sometimes maybe you have a ticket and you do not want to put the entire ticket, and maybe you want to co-invest with another family office or other investors. And the second thing that maybe some other times it's even more important is about the possibility of creating synergies, about skills and knowledge of that sector, about maybe the possibility to have an add-on with the portfolio of one or the other party, and maybe to decide together how to split the cake with your partner or your partners. Just I want to say something else about the management evaluation that it's also related to this question. I think that first it really depends by the life cycle, because in some cases, I mean, I would be very happy to understand that the company is undervalued because the management team is very poor, because then it would be a very good opportunity to change the management and uncover all the value of that company. And the second thing to answer to Carol is that unfortunately in Europe is not so easy like in USA to do a background checks, because all the data are private. So you cannot check, for example, if someone has been arrested or any other checks that I think you can do. You can ask to the management team to provide you a copy of the official documentation where the authorities say that, for example, they have never been arrested, that they have never. So, but you need to ask them. It's not something that you can go to a private company and ask for a background checks. So we need to use other methods to evaluate the management team.
Yeah, my view. Look, I've had pretty good experience doing club deals, but they're more difficult. Obviously, venture investing typically is done that way. Private equity, much less so. I've done it in private equity effectively. It's slower, so you have to build in extra time, because you got to keep everybody on the same page all the way through the investment period, and sometimes that's a hindrance. But in general, I've had pretty good experience with it.
Gotcha. Guys, I think